Can we pull off an effective zero-gravity shot in space? Not literally in space, but making it look like space, because space is a place and there's no gravity there.
Real science with Ryan.
Right?
I'll tell you what, that sounds like science to me.
I've always wanted to try a zero-gravity shot, but they tend to be incredibly difficult, even for a film with a big budget and plenty of resources. But we put our heads together and came up with something. So see if you can guess how we did it before we tell you. Obviously, this shot was inspired by this shot from Supergirl, and I love how it came out, but getting that floating look was tricky. Our first idea was a green screen underwater, but refractions in the water, bubbles, and other issues would have made it obvious, I think. So instead, I called up my friends at Lens Pro to go.
Hold on. Hello, this is Lens Pro to go, the dopest spot for renting hot Can I help you today, or what? Hello, Lens Pro to go, this is Ryan Conley. Ryan? Dude! We were all just talking about how hot you are, dude, and that's crazy that you just called. You and everyone else. Are you kidding? That's joking around. I'm joking around. Bobby, come here. Come listen to us.
So they sent us this, the Phantom Flex 4K, which can record up to 1000 frames per second in, as the name suggests, 4K. And genuinely, the people at Lens Pro to Go are phenomenal. I love them so much, and we have worked with them for over 12 years. They've always been some of my favorite people to work with, and if you need to rent gear of any kind, you will not find better, more helpful, or just genuinely kind people to rent from. Link in the notes for them, definitely check that out. But 1000 frames per second is insanely slow. Even falling feels stalled like you see here. Water turns into this gorgeous texture floating in the frame. And that gave us this idea. Emily jumping into the air and spinning in front of a green screen. We grabbed this coat for her to wear that would give us this solid movement and have the same vibe as the shot from Supergirl. We also had this leaf blower to kick her coat and hair around a bit more. And for lighting, we had some aperture lights behind her acting as the sun and a tube light in front giving us just a small bit of light for detail in the shadows. But we shot a ton of takes looking for the movement that was just right. And in the end, what looked like this in real time looked like this from the Phantom. We could have had even more time with her in the air if we would have used our trampoline, but we weren't able to get the camera or a green screen high enough on this go around, so we just had her jump from the ground. But since it is so slow with little movement between the frames, we can take it a lot further in post if needed. Even moving this down to 50% with optical flow on looks great and gives me a lot more room to do what I need. But now it's time to composite this shot into space. But before we do, let's talk sound. Sound is color grading for your ears. No shot is done until you've built out the sound of the world you're showing. And today, I wanted to show you this new automated process from our sponsor, Krotos. Specifically, their new Premiere Pro plugin, which syncs sound to picture automatically. I'll set an in and an out point here on the timeline to create a region, hit analyze, then the plugin does its thing and places real audio recordings onto my timeline synced to the cuts. And it's not generating anything. These are real recordings made by their in-house team of humans. The plugin is just analyzing the footage and placing the sounds in the places it thinks fits. We have ambience, cloth, whooshes, risers, impacts, and footsteps. I never want to place another footstep for the rest of my life. It does a solid job specifically on cut transitions like this. And usually gets the ambience really close too. But this isn't a hit a button and you're done thing. What it really is a strong starting point. With my sounds in, I can then go here and search for alts. If I don't have a sound that's the right one for my moment, I can swap those out very easily like this here. And as you can see, it's simple, intuitive, and just helps you get to the good stuff a lot faster. And if you want to design out further, you just click right here to open Krotos Studio and off you go. So if that sounds useful, sign up at the link in the description to get the Premiere Pro plugin as part of your Krotos Studio subscription, and use the coupon code FilmRiot10 at checkout for 10% off. Links and all that below. So now with our footage in After Effects, we're going to drop it into a new comp and use a mix of keying and roto until we get a clean alpha, finishing all that off with a spill suppressor to suppress that spill. Spill suppressor. To make her look like she's floating rather than jumping, we'll drop the keyed version into a new comp, and we'll use the grid overlay so we can keyframe her position throughout the timeline to keep her eyes level for the entire shot. Then we'll crop the comp to fit closer, giving us this constant vertical position and that 3D rotation. Next, we're going to create a new 16:9 comp and add a black solid as the background layer, and for the space elements, we're going to be using assets from Action VFX to build out the environment based off of the original shot. So we'll drop in this planet asset, rotate, make it a 3D layer, push it far back in Z space, and then scale up, placing it to the lower right. Now adjust the colors a bit and make the highlights pop, then use a duplicate below with a fast box blur and lower opacity to create a softer atmosphere falloff. We also added a stars image as a 3D layer, again pushing it into the distance and scaling up. Then create a 3D camera and a null layer, making that null layer 3D and then linking the camera to it. This will be our camera control so we can keyframe its rotation, making the camera orbit around a fixed point. For deciding the camera speed and amount of pan needed, we'll drop in our Emily comp and line her up where we want. Then, based on how much 3D rotation we see in her, we'll keyframe the Y rotation to roughly match, and the more she turns, the further the camera will need to orbit around her. And now that we see our starting camera view, we'll use a copy of the stars asset and move that over to fill the void. And rotate to change the duplicated pattern. We can see in the original it also has some Nebula style detail in the sky, so we dropped in this one, which we got from Action VFX as well, made it 3D with the distant position again, and set the blending mode to add. We also used a hue and saturation effect, shifting the hue to feel more orange to tie it in with our final color scheme, then lowered the layer opacity. You could use a variety of different assets for more nebulas, but we decided to use the same one, duplicated, rotated, and scaled with different opacity strengths throughout this area to fill a lot of the background. This also helps separate Emily from the dark background in the final shot. For the sun, we'll create a point light, push it far back, and line up to be close to Emily's head at the end of the sequence. 3D layers are affected by lights, so in the material options, switch off the accept lights and shadows setting for each layer. There's several lens flare plugins you can use, but we went with Red Giant's real lens flare on a new solid layer, and because we're working in aces, we can change this render setting to match, then choose to use AE light and set the layer to add. Inside, we have a lot of flare presets to choose from. As a base, we opted for the justified and ancient presets, changing a few settings, then duplicating to choose different flares. We ended up using 5 different flares at various layer opacities to give us this final version. For the Spacecraft Destruction floating in the environment, we found a few interesting 3D models on CG Trader, which we'll use on a new solid layer placed beneath Emily. And we'll drop on the Element 3D plugin here. Inside Element, we built up layers of destruction with random placements, scales, and rotation on a number of duplicates, closely following the original before adding a dark metallic material to all of them, as well as changing the environment map to something with cold tones to match our planet. Back in our comp, you can see the 3D models are currently located in roughly the same 3D space as Emily. So in the world transform, we'll once again push the Z position far back, scale up the world to the size that we want, and change the position and rotation values. You can either have it really far back to where there isn't that much parallax, which gives a sense of distance and scale, or have it close to get more individual movement and depth, which we went with for some more visual interest. While it is currently being affected by our lens flare point light, for the infinite backlit look from a distant sun, we'll go into the element render settings, lighting, and swap to the dark preset, which gives us this look. Then we'll change the brightness and rotation as well as the environment settings to get the best look for our light direction and reflections. With the curves effect, we'll add some contrast and push the highlights a bit warmer to match our sun. And on the Emily layer, we'll also add some contrast as well as alter color with the Lumetri effect and use feathered mask adjustment layers in our stable comp for certain areas, such as adding some light to her face, backlighting the coat, and making her hair highlights brighter like in the original shot. Another thing we ended up doing for the hair was using another comp of the original plate and crushing the contrast until we were left with just the bright hair strands, which aren't as visible in the key. We can then place this above her layer in the main comp and use an unmult effect to key out the black and set the layer to add. On a few adjustment layers above, we also use some glow effects for the highlights as well as softening out the lens flare a bit, and another adjustment layer with an exposure effect to make the scene have more contrast. For some added texture, we used a bunch of lens stock footage assets from both our vision pack as well as our new lens elements pack, just setting each asset to add and building up layers of flares, bokeh, chromatic lens effects, and textured borders, which feel kind of like refractions of the bright planet and also help bring up the dark edges of the frame a bit. We then finished the shot with a subtle camera wobble, a bit of chromatic aberration, a color grade, and some grain, giving us this. One thing that I think is really interesting is how quickly you can change the vibe of the shot or the environment just by changing the lens flares and altering color like this, which gives a cold, darker vibe, but works really well for that strong backlit look on Emily. And if you're interested in any of our lens assets, you can get them over at tryanddigital.com. Links for that and everything else in the notes below. There you have it, a zero gravity shot done with high speed slow motion. And if you guessed it before we told you, feel free to gloat in the comments below. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.